Welcome back. Another video with HMAR Mobile Tech. 2008 Volkswagen Rabbit 2.5 liter rear brake job. Taking off the caliper, you're going to need your ratchet with your 13 millimeter socket, and then you're going to need a 15 millimeter wrench. And what you'll do is you'll put your ratchet set up here onto your 13 millimeter headed socket, and then you'll put the wrench here behind this caliper ear right here, just to here. Then you'll see a hex that you can grab onto it with your 15 millimeter. And so you'll hold this steady as you loosen this off back here. So loosen this about 80% of the way out, and then leave the bolt in, and then go do the bottom one here. And then that way the caliper doesn't swing out on you as you try to loosen it off. So little trick that I use for doing brake jobs. So once you get the caliper itself off by removing, if you'll look to the far back of the right of the screen, you'll see two little 13 millimeter headed bolts, and you'll see a little set screw for the rotor. So once you remove those, you'll use this brake rewind tool service kit. Excuse me, I can't speak. And so what you'll do is you'll set it up in there with the correct adapter that fits into the teeth of the caliper tip. And I will show a picture of that, of which one that I used. But it'll make obvious sense to you that it fits in there properly and seats flush like this. And then you'll see where my thumb is moving. So this one here is a 7/8 or 22 millimeter nut that you need to just tighten back and make sure that it doesn't move when you turn it. And I will do my best filming this myself to show you. I've already kind of started rewinding it, but you're going to turn it to the right, so you're going to turn it clockwise. So once you've used your wrench to tighten this there, then go to this step here, get it in there and get it to where it fits snug, and then you turn it. And this is really hard to show without a helper or a tripod. So so you'll just get this up here and you'll turn it, and I really can't do this. I have to have a second hand. So you'll just turn this until you'll feel the caliper turning inside of itself, and you'll just turn it all the way in, and I'll show a picture of what it looks like when you're all done. You should not have to put a pipe on here or a wrench or anything. You should be able to do all this by hand. It will go by hand. I've already done it 4 or 5 turns. And then once you get it all the way in, you'll see the boot go, and make sure the boot is not sticking out, or make sure the boot's not cracked if you're going to be reusing this caliper. And you don't want it pinched or anything, so just make sure you're watching out for that as you're turning this to the right, so clockwise, to tighten it in all the way flush. This is how it looks like when it's pressed all the way in, the piston of the caliper. And then you'll just loosen this nut here on this caliper rewind tool, and you'll pull it out. And this is the adapter that I used here to fit into there. And so as you're turning it, you'll notice as you're turning it clockwise to the right, you'll keep turning it, and then you'll see that it's going in and getting closer. You know, it's basically going back inside the piston housing, and you'll notice that the boot is starting to bunch up here, and then it'll get really hard, and then it will stop. Don't force it past that point, because that means that it's all the way as far in as it can go, and that it will go. And that's all that you need to do for that. Okay, you'll get your roughly 1 to 2 pound rubber mallet, and you'll get your 3/8 breaker bar with your 14M triple square spline socket. And then if you have a 1/2 inch, of course you'll be using a 1/2 inch breaker bar with the 1/2 inch socket. All I have is the 3/8 drive. So come over here, and once the caliper's off, you'll come back here, and there'll be two of them, and the 2 bolts that hold the caliper bracket onto the steering knuckle, or rather this back rear end knuckle that holds all the suspension parts on it, control arm and shock and everything. So as you can see there, and then what you'll do is get the ratchet, the breaker bar rather up here. And then what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to hammer on it like this, and I've already loosened them off, so you'll just tap it like that, and make sure that wherever you think the handle is going to land, that it isn't going to break anything or mess anything up. And this caliper's loose, so it's basically just going to go down here past the brake line and stop here. And the reason you're going to use a hammer is because with these sudden impacts, whacking it down like that will be similar to an impact wrench, you know, either air or electric. And so you do these sudden impacts, and it'll loosen them off. And just remember that when you're back here, you want to make sure you go the right direction. So if you can't figure that out, then look at it from underneath the car, pointing this way. Which way would you turn the socket or the nut to loosen it? Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So the way I remember is that if I'm looking at it here and I think to myself, what do I want to do? I want to loosen it. So then I know it's backwards, so I tighten it, which would be going clockwise. So it just depends on how you look at it. It's all relative. So if you're looking at it from behind, then it's going to make sense. If you're looking at it front ways, then it's going to make sense. Because when you're using a breaker bar, it doesn't have a ratcheting part on it. So you can't really tell what direction you're going unless you do what I just told you. And that's what always goes through my mind whenever I do brake jobs, or when the bolt or the nut is facing me the reverse way, not straight on. Like if there was a bolt going straight in this way, we'll just say that this is a bolt here, and then you would turn it to the left to loosen it, turn it to the right to tighten it. Here, the bolt's coming this way, so you have to just change that in your head, and then you'll be right every single time. And that's exactly how I do it every single time. these two bolts that hold the caliper bracket on back here on this back wheel knuckle here, they were very difficult to get to with my 1/2 inch torque wrench because there just wasn't any room for me to be able to rotate. No matter how I tried, I couldn't do it just from sitting down, you know, where I'm just facing the rotor. So I'm underneath the vehicle, and I've got some wobble extensions, and I'll show which ones that I used, that are 3/8 that go to an adapter, and the adapter goes all the way back to adapt from 1/2 inch down to 3/8, so it's reducing it. So I didn't have a 1/2 inch 14M spline, triple spline socket, so I just have a 3/8, so I have to make do with this. So if you find yourself in this situation, this will help you. Probably even with the 1/2 inch 14M socket, triple square socket, you're still going to have a space issue with your torque wrench. So what I did here is I just went back behind the rear sway bar, and then I went in through here and got right to that upper bolt there, and then I was able to torque it there with my extension and my 1/2 inch drive torque wrench. And then what I did here is, see, you could see there's straight access to that lower bolt, so then I took my setup and put it on that bolt as well, and that's how I was able to torque it. Now, anytime you tighten down any bolts, do them by hand with a ratchet in your socket so that you can make sure that they're tight, and then the torque wrench, you're just following up to make sure that there's no way that they're loose and that you're at the OEM specification torque, so that you know it's good and tight and that you can feel confident that you've done a good job and that those bolts aren't going to back out at some point later on down the road. So this is exactly how I had to do it. I really just could not do it just sitting in front, you know, just sitting down in front of the rotor, facing the rotor on the outside. I had to come underneath the car to do this. So another good reason to try to jack the car up at least a good 2 feet off of the ground, if you can. That way you have space if you ever need to get under there to get at another angle or do something you need to do and drop a tool or something, you know, just be safe, have it supported properly, you know, on both sides, and do things the right way, safe. So the caliper bracket will be off, and what you'll do to it is, using your brake parts cleaner, you'll clean here in the anti-rattle clips here. So in there where the grooves are, where the brake pads are going to go, right there and right there. And I've already used, there's like a little brush inside there in the brake caliper grease, and that little brush, you just put on a little smear in there. There's going to be 4 little grooves. You're going to put a little bit in there, and then those are the threaded holes where those 14M bolts are going to go in that hold the this caliper bracket onto the back side of the wheel knuckle. And there's threads in there, so you want to spray a little bit of brake parts cleaner in there to clean those out. And then these are your glide pins, so you'll pull those out, and then you'll put a little bit on here, and you'll put a little bit on there, and then they're going to go back in there. And then you'll spray a little bit of disc brake quiet on your brake pads, just a thin layer, you know, like 1.5 second burst per pad is more than enough, and then you should be good. So once you have the brake pads in, you'll set the caliper on, you'll line everything up, and you'll put the 2 13mm headed bolts in each of the upper and the lower caliper ears, and then you'll get your 15mm wrench, and then you'll have your torque wrench with your 13mm socket, and then I've already torqued them, but when you're going to torque this, the wrench might move, so hold it. So basically you're just going against the way that the torque wrench is going when you're opposing it, so that way that slider bolt doesn't move. And so yeah, and that's how it looks there. I'm just doing this with one hand, so because I got to film in the other hand. So you'll grab this here and you'll oppose it. So whatever way you're turning your torque wrench, you're going to hold this the opposite way. So now you got all your old parts off and all your new parts installed. Everything torqued to the factory specifications. The caliper glide pins, 21 foot-pounds, and then the caliper bracket bolts, those two M14 triple square drive bolts, those are 60 foot-pounds. Once everything's all good and back together, then step on the brake pedal just to seat the pads in, maybe about 10 times pumping it. And once you do that, come over and set the e-brake and make sure that the rotors don't move. So you'll do this for the other side as well. And then once you're sure everything looks good, you can go back and you can just make sure everything spins freely. And it's supposed to sound this way. It's the sound of the pads touching the rotor. You'll do the same thing over here. And then the last thing you'll do is I've already done this step. So to demonstrate, you'll take this whole cover off here. You'll take this clamp, you'll loosen this, unplug the mass airflow sensor, take out these two little Torx screws, and then you'll remove this top off so you can get back into the brake fluid down there. You'll see the little yellow cap there, little circle cap there, and then you'll make sure that's topped off to the full position. So you'll have your torque wrench set for 88 foot-pounds, and then just remember, as the last step before you drive the vehicle, take it out on a road test, is that you torque all 5 wheel lug nuts on the right rear and all 5 lug nuts on the left rear. So you'll just go in a star pattern, and then you'll go all the way in a circle one time to make sure you got them all.